We have a guest coming on board here locally, which I think is fantastic, and you're going to be doing a great interview.
We have a very interesting guest. Her name is Olga Ravassi, and she's an individual that is from Serbian descent. So she has a very good and interesting perspective from the opposite side, the receiving end of our foreign policy. Olga, are you on the line with us?
Absolutely.
Dobro veče. That's a new Serbian terminology I heard, and I'd like to welcome you with that. Olga, you've done some pretty significant things with the Serbian community. You own, or you're a co-founder of the Serbian radio station in Chicago, correct?
Yes.
And you also have, you've done some profound things. You are a political analyst on that TV show, or on the radio station, with respects to our foreign policy and the relationships or the effects of that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're also working on a dissertation for your doctorate. Can you share a little bit about what that's about?
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me. And I'm in the final stages of writing my doctoral dissertation. As some of you may imagine, it's a very tedious work. But I have completed all of my coursework, and as I said, just in the process of writing now. I am focusing on the U.S. foreign policy towards Serbia and Kosovo. Kosovo was a province of Serbia who in 2008 declared unilateral independence. After 1999 bombing of Serbia by NATO and U.S. forces in the operation called Allied Force and Merciful Angel. Ironically, there was nothing merciful about it because there were so many civilian casualties. And from that point on, we have learned to use this term collateral damage regarding the civilian casualties. And I think at that point, the bombing of Yugoslavia and actually disintegration of Yugoslavia was almost a guinea pig and a practice ground for all other military actions that were to come afterwards. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, now we're looking into Syria, Iran. There are some commonalities between all these countries that were the target of the NATO and U.S. foreign policy. And what's interesting, and I think we are at that point, we have just found out actually that our military can be sent to war without the congressional approval. When it came to bombing of Yugoslavia, there was actually no UN Security Council approval. So basically, NATO and the U.S. military at this point are free to go into action without approval from anybody, technically. So the Serbian community here, what's interesting to point out is that after our capital of Belgrade in Serbia, Chicago is actually our second capital. According to some estimates, there are about 350,000 Serbian people or people of Serbian descent in the Chicagoland, including Northwest Indiana and parts of Wisconsin. The Serbian community has obviously been very loyal to the United States. We have some prominent figures that have been a part of American culture as well. And what's important to point out that the Serbian people in this community are gathering behind Ron Paul, and I am a part of that group that is so willing to accept his views on foreign policy. These views that are non-interventionist, that are not militant. And, you know, the things that people often say, oh, he's an isolationist, I think we need to really distinguish between isolationism and non-militarism. And by talking to people, by using diplomacy, there is nothing that says isolationism about that.
Olga,
it is actually, yes.
I'm sorry. We've seen a wave that, at least in the Middle East, that a lot of our movement, a lot of our conduct is in relation to natural resources, interests that we have here. what do you think, we have our message that we get from our media, which we've seen is not necessarily, and more often not, the truth. From your perspective, what was the reason that we, took preemptive measures against Serbia along with the UN?
Well, the mainstream media has represented the situation in Kosovo, who at this point, many people are not, and we have discussed this before, many people are not really familiar with the historical context of this region. And the historical context of this region is centuries old. So we cannot resolve these problems just by military force, because forcing somebody to act a certain way actually deepens this conflict. And the mainstream media has presented this conflict as a humanitarian intervention to protect the Albanian minority who lives in Kosovo. The Albanian minority in the province of Kosovo during the time of Yugoslavia has had a very loose autonomy, which means they had their own schools, they had their own hospitals, they could utilize their own language, they had their own representatives. What was very interesting is that over the years and decades, Albanian migrants have been moving into Kosovo illegally. But at the time, the policies of Yugoslavia were that any child born on the territory of Yugoslavia automatically became a Serbian citizen or Yugoslavian citizen at the time. So given the fact that most Albanians were also Muslims and some of them did practice polygamy, there was a huge actually growth of their population compared to the Serbian population, who on average has 2 or 3 children. The migration of the Albanians and the force that they were using against the native Serbian population in the area contributed to the fact that many Serbian people over the years started fleeing their homes from Kosovo.
Olga, this is Forrest speaking. I have a question for you. Saying that the large population of Serbians here in the Chicagoland area, obviously we have our primary election Tuesday the 20th. What can be done in this short order to engage that community, or what could we do to help you engage that community to go vote for Ron Paul on Tuesday? That's a very big block.
Well, I think what Serbian are definitely concerned with is our policies in the United States, domestic policies. I'm sure all of us are affected by the economics, but what many people don't realize is actually that our economics are very much tied into our foreign policy. And those two things are very important. People should not be ignorant of what we are doing across the ocean. I just wanted to go back to this point. The largest European military base was actually built in Kosovo. And because of everything that is happening within our financial system, and we quite frankly don't have the money anymore to support these large military bases all over the world, in 2013, the US military may be leaving Kosovo. So Serbian people are very much concerned with the domestic policies, the economic policies, that Ron Paul is very strong on, but they also have very strong ties to their homeland, and they are concerned about what is going to happen with their family and friends that are left over there, because after the bombing and after all of this had seemingly calmed down, what people don't realize is actually that this region is on the brink of another war. And there are new violent acts being committed from the Albanians basically on the daily basis through the KLA, which was at some point listed as a terrorist organization on the CIA list. So what we need to do, and what I know Ron Paul is very gracious about, was this support of non-interventionism and non-militarism, because Serbian people will never forget his friendship and his grace in 1999, when our families and our friends and our children were bombed into submission in order to allow an Albanian minority that has been involved in serious criminal activity, and there are serious allegations of even Al-Qaeda fighters and Al-Qaeda support in the Albanian community. There are serious allegations of drugs and weapon trafficking. In 2010, Dick Marty, who is a member of the European Council, brought up a huge report about organ trafficking in Albania and in Kosovo, from the Serbian people that were kidnapped and also Albanians that were not cooperating with KLA. So the Serbian community in Chicagoland and all over the United States will give their vote to Ron Paul because of his foreign policy.
Well, I just want to add that the numbers that you told us relative to the Chicagoland area, that could swing a number of districts to send delegates if they show up to vote. For example, in my district alone, it's only going to take a few thousand votes to send delegates to the convention, and there's a few other districts like that as too. For example, Rick Santorum isn't even on the ballot in my district, and so it's a much tighter one. So whatever you could do or we could do to help encourage them to go out and vote on this Tuesday and pull the ticket for the Ron Paul delegates would be a tremendous help.
I think we can work together. Serbian Radio Chicago is definitely open. We have been on the air for 16 years. We are the most prominent media in the Chicagoland. As I said, there's a big constituency here of the Serbian community. And it's important to point out not only the Serbian community, but as Yugoslavia disintegrated, many people from former Yugoslav republics moved here. Croatians, Bosnians, Montenegrians, Macedonians, all these people listen to Serbian Radio Chicago. We all speak the same language, or a different dialect of the same language. And all of these people can really find something tremendously important in Ron Paul's policies. And I am encouraging tonight everybody who is listening from the Balkan Peninsula, from our part of the world, to go out and give their vote to Ron Paul, because he has been the voice of reason. He has been the voice who has been protecting the world from all this militarism that I think people are really sick and tired of. And what's really important to say also that President Obama has won the popular vote around the world. And I think Ron Paul can actually benefit from this, because if there was a poll taken around the world, if all these different countries could vote, I am certain they would vote for Ron Paul. And I think this is a really good point for him, because many people in different countries are recognizing that these policies are making us bankrupt, and these policies are killing civilians. And unfortunately, average American citizens are now on the receiving end of these negative sentiments towards all of us as Americans. You know, an average American tourist will go to Europe and they're frowned upon because everybody thinks that America is contributing, or the American policies are contributing to all the negativity that is going on in the world. And unfortunately, the policymakers are not on the receiving end of this, but an average citizen who really is in the same boat as everybody else in the world.
Olga, back in the 1990s when we were bombing Serbia, do you recall at that time, did Ron Paul take an active stance at that time in support, or, in some regards, protecting the Serbian community, or in opposition of what we were doing? Do you recall, what his position was at that time, or if he was, an active participant in speaking against that?
Absolutely. And for those of you who are really interested in this, there are wonderful clips on YouTube of Ron Paul speaking to Congress and being, again, that voice of reason, asking American government to speak to the Serbian government, to find some common ground and not to bomb Serbia, because Serbia has always been a traditional friend and an ally of the American people. We have gone through World War I and World War II as friends, as allies, as people who were always on the side of freedom and liberty. And Ron Paul has been so gracious to respect this history. And I think what's very important is not that only he knows history, he respects it. Unlike Newt Gingrich, who calls himself a historian, and he certainly knows a lot about it, but I don't think he has that deep-rooted respect for it.
Yeah.
Ron Paul respects history, and he draws conclusions from history, trying to find solutions to conflicts through diplomacy, through strategy, through dialogue, rather than military intervention. So yes, to answer your question, he was very, very vocal in Congress, speaking against this military operation that took place in Serbia, that unfortunately took away many, many civilian casualties, and against all military conventions. Geneva Convention, at that time cluster bombs were used and depleted uranium. So there are many, many things that have gone on over the years, and as I said, even today nobody mentioned this in the mainstream media, but the region is still on the brink of another conflict, simply because these things cannot be resolved by bombing somebody into submission.
And it's such a treat to have you on, because oftentimes, and I'm sure you've experienced, and we're all Ron Paul supporters are starting to experience the bias of the media, and oftentimes we're not really hearing the truth. So it's such a treat to have you on to share some of the insight of the receiving end of our foreign policy and how really truly flawed it is, and how, you know, much of what Ron Paul says speaks truth. But, you know, for our viewers that are out there, where can they find out more truthful information about the conflict in Serbia, what had gone on then, maybe some of the true historical, you know, components of what had gone on in the 90s to create such a, you know, a support base for Ron Paul in the Serbian community? Where can they learn some of this? Where can they find you, or where can they find your show, you know, so that they can listen more and learn some more about some of this true history?
Well, Serbian Radio Chicago would be an excellent resource, and everybody could start there. They could get in contact with me and anybody else that is at the radio station. We have a wealth of information here through the Serbian Orthodox Church, who is also very prominent in this community. So anybody that is interested, again, there's a wealth of information out there on the internet about this conflict. And I think slowly the geopolitical system is changing, but not fast enough. And I think we are, again, all of us together as people, we are on the losing end of these military interventions. So if anybody is interested, we are open to share any information we can with you. And again, we want to encourage everybody to go out there and vote for Ron Paul, because he is the only voice of reason and the only voice that the world needs right now. Because from Yugoslavia or Serbia, going into Libya, going into Afghanistan, going into Iraq, now we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Iran. The drums of war are drumming, but I don't think the support of the people is there. And it is very unfortunate that at this point it seems our government can go into war and commit our forces and our children to these conflicts that really are not supported by the American people. And at this point, if the Congress is not supporting the voice of the people, then what is the point?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight, Olga. We really appreciate your time and the support of your community. So thank you again, and we look forward to hopefully being on your radio show and getting some more Ron Paul support.
Thank you so much for having me.